The cold seeped through the floorboards of the apartment, a persistent, unwelcome guest that no amount of rolled-up towels under the door could banish. Ania Williams felt it in her bones, a deep, weary chill that had little to do with the late autumn air. It was the chill of scarcity, the cold of a bank account hovering just above zero. She sat at the small, wobbly kitchen table, a single lamp casting a lonely circle of light on the papers spread before her. Bills, a stack of them, each one a paper cut to her fragile peace of mind. The most menacing of them all lay on top, its stark red lettering a shout in the quiet room. Past due, rent, final notice. She traced the letters with a finger that trembled slightly. $352. It might as well have been $1 million. She had $117 to her name, tucked away in a ceramic sugar jar shaped like a smiling bear, a relic from her mother's kitchen. $117 to last until her next paycheck from the diner, which was still 4 days away. $117 to feed herself and her 10-year-old brother, Leo. She glanced toward the open doorway of the single bedroom they shared. Leo was asleep, a small lump under a threadbare quilt, his breathing soft and even. He was the reason she did this. The reason she worked double shifts until her feet were swollen and her back screamed in protest. The reason she ate plain rice for dinner so he could have the chicken. He was her promise, her purpose, the last, most precious gift her mother had left her. "I'll take care of him, Mama," she had whispered at the hospital, her mother's hand cool and frail in hers. "I promise. I'll make sure he's safe. I'll make sure he has a good life." The memory brought a familiar ache to her chest. It had been 6 months since the cancer had won. 6 months since their world had shrunk to this cramped 2-room apartment on the 3rd floor of the Crestwood Arms, a building that had seen better days decades ago. The plaster on the walls was a roadmap of cracks. The faucet in the kitchen sink dripped a maddening, constant rhythm, and the radiator in the corner clanked and hissed like a dying beast, offering more noise than warmth. Anaya was tired, a profound, soul-deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. She was tired of counting pennies. She was tired of the gnawing anxiety that woke her in the dead of night. She was tired of feeling like she was failing Leo, failing the memory of her mother. But her mother had taught her more than just how to stretch a dollar. She had taught her about integrity, about kindness, about holding your head high, even when your heart was on the floor. "Dignity, Ania," her mother used to say, her voice warm and steady. "It's the one thing nobody can take from you unless you give it away. You remember that." She remembered. She held on to those words like a shield. It was why she always greeted her neighbors with a smile, even when her own world was crumbling. It was why she left a small bowl of fresh water out for the stray cat that roamed the alleyway. It was why she had used 20 of her precious dollars last week to buy groceries for old Mrs. Gable on the 1st floor, whose pension check was late. Kindness was not a luxury. It was a necessity. It was the currency of her mother's world, and Anaya refused to let it go bankrupt. But kindness didn't pay the rent. And Mr. Sterling, the landlord, was not a man who dealt in the currency of kindness. He dealt in cash, promptly on the 1st of the month. He was a man whose smile never reached his eyes, whose expensive suits seemed out of place against the backdrop of his own decaying building. He had inherited the Crestwood Arms from his father, and it was clear he viewed the tenants as little more than a nuisance, a messy but necessary part of the income stream. He had made his disdain for Anaya clear from the beginning. During her initial interview, he had looked over her application, his lip curling slightly. "Just you and the boy?" he had asked, his tone implying a dozen other questions. "The diner? That's your only income?" He had made her feel small, like a charity case he was reluctantly taking on. She had needed a place to live, desperately, so she had swallowed her pride and signed the lease. Now that lease was a guillotine hanging over her head. She pushed the notice away, the red letters blurring through a sudden film of tears. She would not cry. Crying wouldn't solve anything. She needed a plan. She could call her manager at the diner, ask for an advance, but she had already done that 2 months ago when Leo needed new shoes. She could try to sell her mother's locket, the one thing of value she owned. The thought was a physical pain, a betrayal she couldn't stomach. Her gaze fell upon a different folder, tucked beneath the stack of bills. It was newer, its manila surface clean and uncreased. Inside were documents she barely understood, filled with legal jargon and complex figures. It was a long shot. A wild, improbable dream her mother had set in motion years ago. A secret plan built on sacrifice and hope. A plan that was supposed to be their salvation. But it was moving too slowly. The final pieces weren't in place yet, and her world was crumbling now. A loud bang on the door made her jump, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't a knock. It was a demand. She knew who it was before she even heard the voice. "Williams! Ania Williams!" "I know you're in there. Open this door." "Mr. Sterling." His voice was sharp, impatient, echoing in the poorly lit hallway. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Not now. Please, not now." She didn't want Leo to wake up. She didn't want him to hear this. She rose on shaky legs, smoothing down her worn sweater, and took a deep breath. "Dignity, Mama." She walked to the door and turned the lock. Mr. Sterling stood there, a thundercloud in a $1,000 suit. His face was flushed, his thin lips pressed into a hard line. He held a copy of the same final notice she had on her table. "I don't appreciate being ignored, Williams," he snapped, his voice carrying down the hall. A few doors creaked open a crack. Her neighbors were listening. The humiliation was a hot flush on her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, I was just—" "You were just what? Counting the money you don't have?" He sneered. "The first was 4 days ago. My patience has run out. You got this notice yesterday. What part of final do you not understand?" "I understand, sir," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm going to have the money. I just need a little more time, a few more days." "Time," he scoffed, laughing a short, ugly laugh. "Time is money. My money. I'm running a business here, not a charity for people like you." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. People like you. She knew what he meant. Young, black, a single mother as far as he was concerned. He saw her not as a person, a grieving daughter trying to raise her brother, but as a stereotype, a liability. "I've been a good tenant," she insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I've never been this late before. I always pay. You know that." "What I know," he said, stepping closer, invading her space, "is that I have a pile of applications for this apartment from people who can actually afford it, people who won't give me a sob story every month." He waved the paper in her face. "This is an eviction notice. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Be out by Friday at noon, or I'll have the sheriff escort you out. And your things." He gestured dismissively at the inside of her apartment. What little there is of them. The cruelty of it stole her breath. He wasn't just evicting her. He was enjoying it. He was relishing his power, this moment of control over her life. From the corner of her eye, she saw Mrs. Gable's door close silently. She saw Mr. Henderson from 3C shake his head and retreat back into his apartment. No one would help. She was alone. "Please, Mr. Sterling," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "My brother. He's just a little boy. Where are we supposed to go?" "That is not my problem," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Perhaps you should have thought of that before you decided to fall behind on your obligations." He then did something that shattered the last of her composure. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and crumpled it in his fist. He threw it at her feet. It landed on the worn welcome mat with a soft thud. "Here," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "A little something to help you move your junk. Don't ever say I'm not a generous man." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and furious. It wasn't just an eviction anymore. It was a performance. He was making a spectacle of her poverty, for the entire floor to see. He wanted to break her. He wanted her to grovel. She looked down at the crumpled bill. Then she looked back up at his smug, expectant face. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. The fear and the desperation receded, replaced by a cold, quiet fire. It was the fire of her mother's spirit, the fire of her promise to Leo. She would not let this man break her. She would not give him the satisfaction. Slowly, deliberately, she bent down. Her neighbors were watching. Mr. Sterling was watching, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought she was going to pick it up. He thought she was beaten. Her fingers brushed against the bill, but she didn't pick it up. Instead, she straightened up, leaving the money on the mat. She looked him directly in the eye, her own gaze clear and unwavering. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority that surprised even herself. "And I won't need 72 hours. His smirk faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said, taking a small, satisfying step back and closing her door until it was open just a crack, "that you and I have an appointment. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., at the offices of Davies and Finch, downtown." Confusion flickered across his face. "Davies and Finch? The law firm? What are you talking about? Are you threatening to sue me? You don't have a leg to stand on, little girl." "It's not a lawsuit, Mr. Sterling," she said through the crack in the door. "It's a closing." And with that, she shut the door in his face, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden silence of the hallway. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood, her body trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline. Outside, she could hear him sputtering, confused and angry. "A closing? What the hell is she talking about?" He kicked the door once, a pathetic, impotent thud, and then she heard his expensive shoes stomping away down the hall. She slid down to the floor, her back against the door, and finally let the tears come. But they were not tears of defeat. They were tears of rage, of release, of a terrifying, exhilarating hope. The plan was not ready. The timing was all wrong. But he had forced her hand. He had pushed her into the fire. What he didn't know was that Anaya Williams was not meant to burn. She was meant to be forged. She took a shaky breath and pulled out her phone. She scrolled to a number she knew by heart. It rang twice before a calm, deep voice answered. "Mr. Davies, it's Anaya Williams." "Anaya, my dear, is everything all right?" "We have to move up the timeline," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. "We have to do it tomorrow. He's evicting me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, Mr. Davies spoke, his voice not surprised but resolute. "I see." The man couldn't help himself, could he? "Very well. I'll make the calls. The necessary parties will be there. Sterling's office will get the notification in the morning. 10 a.m. it is. Are you ready for this, Anaya?" She looked at the crumpled $100 bill still lying outside, visible under the crack of the door. She thought of her mother's tired hands, her unwavering faith. She thought of Leo, sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the storm raging just outside his door. "Yes," she said, a fierce smile breaking through her tears. "I'm ready." The next morning, Anaya woke before the sun. She moved with a quiet purpose that had been absent for months. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a powerful sense of resolve. She made Leo his favorite breakfast, pancakes with a smiley face drawn in syrup, and packed his lunch for school. She braided her hair with meticulous care, choosing the simple but elegant black dress her mother had bought her for a graduation she never got to see. It was the only expensive piece of clothing she owned. Today, it was her armor. After she walked Leo to the bus stop, kissing his forehead and telling him she loved him, she returned to the apartment. She didn't pack. Instead, she walked to the door and opened it. The crumpled $100 bill was still there, a monument to Mr. Sterling's arrogance. She picked it up, smoothed it out, and slid it under Mrs. Gable's door with a small, handwritten note. "For your groceries. Thinking of you, Ani." She took the bus downtown, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The city blurred past the window, a world of people hurrying to their important jobs, their important lives. For so long, she had felt invisible in this world. Today, she felt like she was walking toward her own destiny. The offices of Davies and Finch were on the 40th floor of a gleaming glass skyscraper. The lobby was all marble and hushed efficiency. It was a world away from the Crestwood Arms. She gave her name to the receptionist, who directed her to a large conference room with a breathtaking view of the city. Mr. Davies was already there. He was a tall, dignified man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a presence that radiated calm authority. He had been her mother's lawyer for years, the one who had helped her set up the secret trust, the one who had guided Anaya through the legal labyrinth after her death. He was more than a lawyer. He was a friend, a guardian of her mother's legacy. "Anaya," he said, taking both her hands in his. "You look just like your mother today. She would be so proud." "I hope so," she whispered. "There is no doubt," he said firmly. "Now are you prepared? He will not take this well." "He doesn't deserve for it to be taken well," she replied, her voice steady. Mr. Sterling arrived at precisely 10 o'clock. He strode into the conference room with an air of supreme confidence, followed by his own lawyer, a younger man who looked nervous. Sterling's eyes widened slightly when he saw Anaya sitting at the long, polished table next to Mr. Davies. "Well, well," he began, a condescending smirk already forming. "Look what we have here. I got a call about a change of venue for the closing. What is this? Some kind of desperate last-minute stunt? Are you here to beg, Williams? Because this fancy office isn't going to change a thing." He sat down opposite them, placing his leather briefcase on the table with a loud snap. "Let's get this over with. My buyers are very eager to finalize the sale of that dump." Mr. Davies smiled a serene, unreadable smile. He gestured to two other men who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table. "Mr. Sterling, I believe you've spoken on the phone with Mr. Peterson and Mr. Cho." The representatives for the purchasing entity, Phoenix Legacy Holdings. Sterling gave them a cursory nod. Gentlemen, good to finally meet in person. Ready to sign and get me my check? Mr. Peterson, the older of the two, simply nodded toward Mr. Davies. Everything is in order, Mr. Sterling, Mr. Davies said, his voice smooth as silk. He slid a thick stack of papers across the table. The funds have been transferred to escrow and verified. All that is required is your signature on the final deed transfer. Sterling eagerly pulled the documents toward him, uncapping a gold fountain pen. Music to my ears. He started to flip through the pages, his eyes scanning for the signature line. He was so focused on the prize, so blinded by his greed, that he didn't see the trap closing around him. There is just one final introduction to be made, Mr. Davies continued, his voice cutting through Sterling's avaricious focus. Phoenix Legacy Holdings is, of course, a parent company. It's customary at a closing of this magnitude for the principal owner to be present. Sterling looked up, annoyed. Fine, fine. Where is he? Let's meet him and be done with it. Mr. Davies's smile widened. He placed a gentle hand on Anaya's shoulder. Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice filling the silent room. Allow me to introduce you to the sole proprietor and chairperson of Phoenix Legacy Holdings, the woman who has just purchased the Crestwood Arms, and by extension, every asset you currently own. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the moment hang in the air. Meet your new landlord, Ms. Ania Williams. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete that Ania could hear the frantic beating of her own heart. Mr. Sterling's gold pen, poised above the paper, slipped from his fingers. It clattered onto the polished table, leaving a small black smear of ink. His head swiveled slowly from Mr. Davies to Anaya. His face, just moments before so full of smug arrogance, was now a mask of utter disbelief. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, grayish pallor. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. What? He finally croaked, the word barely a whisper. What did you say? I believe you heard me, Mr. Davies said calmly. No, that's impossible, Sterling stammered, shaking his head. He pointed a trembling finger at Anaya. Her? She's a waitress. She can't even pay her rent. This is a joke. This has to be some kind of sick joke. He turned to his own lawyer, who looked just as stunned. Is this legal? Can they do this? Anaya finally found her voice. It was quiet, but it cut through his panic like a knife. It's very legal, Mr. Sterling. She leaned forward slightly. My mother, Eleanor Williams, worked as a nurse for 35 years. She saved every penny she could. She also made some very, very smart investments a long time ago. With Mr. Davies's guidance, she believed in building something for the future. For me. For Leo. She gestured to the papers in front of him. Phoenix Legacy is the trust she built. When she passed away, she left it to me. We've been quietly acquiring assets for months, and when your building went on the market, listed under your private holding company to avoid alerting the tenants, Mr. Davies saw an opportunity. The opportunity for my mother's legacy to come full circle. Sterling stared at her, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. The dots were connecting in his mind, forming a picture of his own spectacular ruin. The condescending remarks, the public humiliation, the crumpled bill he had thrown at her feet. All of it was replaying in his mind, but now he was not the star of the show. He was the fool. But the sale, my price, he stammered. It was a premium offer. Yes, it was, Mr. Davies interjected smoothly. Mrs. Williams insisted on paying your full asking price. She wanted this to be a clean, indisputable business transaction. She wanted to buy you out, fair and square, with no room for you to contest it. Sterling slumped in his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too big for him. He looked from Anaya's calm, resolute face to the impassive expressions of the corporate representatives, to his own lawyer, who was now staring down at the table as if trying to find a hole to crawl into. He was cornered. He was beaten. And he knew it. "So this was all a game to you?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Letting me evict you, humiliating you in the hallway. You were just enjoying it?" Anaya's expression hardened. "Enjoying it? Mr. Sterling, you have no idea what my life has been like these past 6 months. You have no idea what it's like to lie awake at night, terrified of how you're going to feed your brother. I wasn't playing a game. I was surviving. I was trying to hold on until this deal was finalized, on its proper schedule. But you couldn't wait, could you? You had to come to my home and wave your power in my face. You had to try and grind me into the dust." She stood up, her small frame seeming to fill the room. "You didn't humiliate me last night, Mr. Sterling. You humiliated yourself. You showed everyone exactly who you are. A small, cruel man who gets his pleasure from kicking people when they're down. You saw a young black woman struggling, and you saw a target. You never once saw a person." She picked up a pen from the table. It was a simple ballpoint, nothing like his gold fountain pen. She slid one document from the stack and turned it around, pushing it toward him. "Sign it." It wasn't a request. It was a command. For a long moment, he just stared at the paper. His empire, his easy life, all of it reduced to a signature line. Defeated, he picked up his ink-stained pen and with a shaky hand, scribbled his name. The dream was over. The nightmare had just begun. But Mr. Davies wasn't finished. "There is one more matter, Mr. Sterling," he said, his tone turning from businesslike to icy. "During the due diligence process, my forensic accountants discovered certain irregularities in the building's finances, specifically regarding the tenant security deposit accounts." Sterling's head snapped up, a new wave of panic in his eyes. "What are you talking about? Those accounts are fine." "Are they?" Mr. Davies slid another, thinner folder across the table. "It appears you've been using the tenant's security deposits as your own personal slush fund for years, borrowing from it for investments, covering personal expenses. It's a classic case of embezzlement. The total amount missing is just over $75,000. A felony, I believe." Sterling's face went completely white. "You can't prove that?" "Oh, I can," Mr. Davies said. "We have the bank records, the withdrawal slips, the transfers to your personal accounts. We have everything." He glanced at his watch. "In fact, I took the liberty of forwarding our findings to the district attorney's office this morning. I believe 2 of their investigators are waiting for you in the lobby right now." The collapse was total. Sterling made a small, choking sound and sagged in his chair, his bravado utterly extinguished. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder but said nothing. There was nothing to say. Anaya watched him, but she felt no pity, only a quiet, profound sense of justice. This was not just about the money or the building. It was about her mother. It was for every person he had ever looked down on, every tenant he had ever ignored, every human being he had ever treated as less than. 2 uniformed officers and 2 plainclothes detectives entered the room. They approached the table, their faces grim and professional. "Arthur Sterling?" one of the detectives asked. Sterling could only nod, his eyes glazed over. You're under arrest for felony embezzlement and wire fraud." As they pulled him to his feet and cuffed his hands behind his back, Sterling's eyes found Anaya's one last time. They were filled with a toxic mixture of hatred, disbelief, and a pathetic plea for mercy. She gave him none. She simply held his gaze, her expression calm and unyielding, until they led him away. The sound of his footsteps, once so arrogant and loud in her hallway, was now the shuffling, defeated sound of a man who had lost everything. When he was gone, the room was quiet again. Anaya finally let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She sank back into her chair, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her feeling lightheaded. Mr. Davies placed a hand on her arm. "It's over, Anaya. You did it." She looked around the room, at the skyline of a city that suddenly felt like it belonged to her. She thought of the leaky faucet, the cracked plaster, the cold floors. She was not just the owner of a building. She was the master of her own life. "No," she said softly. A real smile, bright and genuine, finally reaching her eyes. "We did it." The first thing Anaya did as the new owner of the Crestwood Arms was not to move into a better apartment or to buy herself something new. The first thing she did was walk to the building's small, cluttered management office in the basement. On a dusty metal desk sat a stack of paperwork. Tenant files. She found her own, a thin folder with her name on it. Tucked inside was the official copy of her eviction notice. She picked it up, the paper feeling flimsy and powerless in her hands now. She remembered the weight of it in her heart just 24 hours earlier. With a deep sense of satisfaction, she tore it in half, then in half again and again, until it was just a pile of confetti in her hands. She let the pieces fall into the trash can. Then she went through the other files. She found 3 more eviction notices, prepared for other tenants who were struggling. Mrs. Gable, whose pension check was late. The Rodriguez family in 2B, whose youngest son had been in the hospital. Mr. Henderson in 3C, who had lost his overtime hours at the factory. She tore them all up. Every single one. Her next call was to a 24-hour emergency plumbing service. By that evening, the drip in her kitchen sink was gone. The silence was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The next day, a team of contractors arrived. They began with the boiler in the basement, and for the first time in years, a steady, reliable wave of warmth spread through the entire building. News of the change in ownership and Sterling's arrest spread through the Crestwood Arms like wildfire. There was a buzz in the hallways, a sense of shock and disbelief that slowly morphed into celebration. That evening, there was a knock on her door. It wasn't the demanding bang of a landlord, but a soft, hesitant rap. She opened it to find Mrs. Gable, Mr. Henderson, and the Rodriguez family standing there. Mrs. Gable was holding a freshly baked apple pie. We heard what happened, dear," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes shining. "We just wanted to say thank you for tearing up those notices. He was going to put us all out." "We never knew," Mr. Henderson added, shaking his head in amazement. "You, all this time. You were like a secret superhero." Anaya laughed, a real, full-throated laugh. "I'm no superhero. I'm just a tenant like you. I know what it's like to worry. From now on, things are going to be different around here. No one is going to be afraid of losing their home because they had a tough month. We're a community. We're going to start acting like one." She invited them in, and they crowded into her small living room, sharing the pie and talking late into the night. For the first time, the apartment didn't feel small. It felt full of warmth and gratitude and hope. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. With the help of Mr. Davies and the team at Phoenix Legacy, Ania established a new management company, one founded on principles of respect and compassion. She hired a full-time superintendent, a kind man named Sal, who took pride in his work. The cracked plaster was repaired, and the hallways were painted a warm, cheerful yellow. The broken front door lock was replaced with a new, secure system. Anaya also made a bold decision. The building had a penthouse apartment, a large 3-bedroom unit that Sterling had kept for himself, using it as a city getaway. It was lavishly furnished, with brand-new appliances and a stunning view. Ania, Leo, and their few belongings moved in. The first night in their new home, Leo ran from room to room, his face alight with pure joy. "I have my own room? My own whole room?" he shouted, jumping on his new bed. Later, as he slept soundly, Anaya stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. The chill in the air was just the crispness of autumn now, no longer the cold of poverty. She had fulfilled her promise to her mother. She had made a safe, beautiful home for her brother. The building itself began to transform. The barren patch of dirt behind the building was turned into a community garden and a small playground. Ania used the building's reserve funds to install new, energy-efficient windows for every apartment, lowering everyone's electricity bills. She established a community room in the basement, with books for the children and comfortable chairs for the adults. But the biggest change was symbolic. With a small, quiet ceremony attended by all the tenants, she had the old, faded sign for the Crestwood Arms taken down. In its place, a new sign was installed, in elegant brushed bronze letters. It read, "The Eleanor House," named for her mother. A place of dignity, a place of community, a place to call home. As for Mr. Sterling, his ruin was as complete as Anaya's victory. His case went to trial. The evidence of his embezzlement was overwhelming. He was found guilty and sentenced to 5 to 7 years in a state prison. His assets were frozen to pay back the stolen security deposits and hefty fines. His wife filed for divorce, and his name, once a symbol of inherited wealth, became a local headline for greed and disgrace. Justice, Anaya learned, was not always swift, but when it arrived, it could be devastatingly thorough. 6 months passed. Spring arrived, and with it, new life bloomed in the community garden at the Eleanor House. Ania was no longer just a landlord. She was the heart of the community she had built. She knew every tenant by name, knew their children, their struggles, their triumphs. She sat in her new, sunlit office on the ground floor, reviewing applications for a newly vacant apartment. One application caught her eye. It was from a young woman, a single mother with a 5-year-old daughter. Her income was low, her credit history was spotty, and she worked as a cleaner at a downtown hotel. Ania saw herself in the woman's story. She saw the same fear, the same fierce determination. She circled the application and wrote "Approved" in big, firm letters. Later that week, she met the new tenant, a shy, tired-looking woman named Maria. Anaya handed her the keys. "Welcome to the Eleanor House," Ania said with a warm smile. "We're happy to have you." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means. I was so scared we wouldn't find a place." "I think I do," Anaya said softly. "Listen, I know things can be tight. Our policy here is a little different. If you're ever going to be late with the rent, don't hide. Don't be afraid. Just come talk to me. We'll work something out. Always." The relief on Maria's face was a reward greater than any bank statement. That evening, Ania and Leo brought a welcome basket to Maria's apartment. filled with groceries, a few toys for her daughter, and a warm, freshly baked loaf of bread. The cycle of kindness, the one her mother had believed in so fiercely, was continuing. One sunny afternoon, Ania was helping Leo and the other children plant sunflowers in the garden. Her phone buzzed. It was a news alert. A local philanthropist, inspired by a news story about the Eleanor House, had just donated $5 million to a new city-wide fund. The fund was designed to help low-income families with housing security and to finance ethical, community-focused property management. The fund was to be administered by a board of directors. The chairperson, the article announced, was Ms. Ania Williams. She stared at her phone, stunned. From a final eviction notice to overseeing a multi-million-dollar fund in less than a year. Her mother's legacy was not just a building anymore. It was a movement. It was a beacon of hope, spreading far beyond the walls of their small, happy community. She looked up from her phone at the scene before her. Children laughing, neighbors chatting over the garden fence, the scent of warm earth and blooming flowers in the air. Leo ran up to her, his hands covered in dirt, and threw his arms around her waist. "Look, Annie!" he yelled, pointing to a small green sprout pushing its way through the soil. "It's growing." Ania hugged him tight, a feeling of overwhelming joy and peace washing over her. She looked up at the sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue. She could almost feel her mother's smile, warm and proud, shining down on them. She was right. It was growing. Everything was.